Hi, good morning, David Roche at Quantum Strategy, and this is the micro podcast on macro, which may matter to markets. Good morning on a Monday. This is what I got to tell you about. First of all, the most important macro developments this week will be the Trump cabinet completion. I personally have doubts about the professional competence of at least three of those appointees: Kennedy, Gabbard, and Hegseth, but that's neither here nor there. The real message is that what we now need to see is what the cabinet is going to do. There are two areas in which I think it can affect policy and therefore affect your portfolio. One is tariffs, and I think Trump will do what he said, 10% worldwide and 60% on China. The result for you is that would mean that inflation in the US, whether you talk about headline or CPE, would be about 3% at the end of next year. So the Fed would not be able to ease. It would have to reverse policy. That, I think, is monumental to your portfolio. Take note and watch this space. The other policy area we await clarification with great excitement is on Ukraine. Okay, this is what I think is going to happen. They'll agree a ceasefire, put in a security corridor, which will be patrolled by NATO. An attack on, over, or through that corridor will be the same as in Article 5 of the NATO Convention of the NATO Treaty clause. In other words, an attack on one will be an attack on all. So that will be accompanied by a lot of financial measures to bolster the Ukrainian army and to maintain or at least close the gap of any rebuilding of Russian forces while the ceasefire is in force. So that is one to watch, because it could be that those guns go silent in Europe and that Trump hits or fulfills one of his promises. Promises made, promises delivered. If he did, you would be surprised how much of a peace dividend, though it would be a very short-term peace in my view, how much of a peace dividend is not included in stocks today, in European stocks. I think it would be, because the markets seem to ignore what goes on in this war, does not mean that they will ignore when it stops. I don't think they will ignore it. So watch that space too. Now, come through 3 or 4 things I want to talk to you about very briefly, hopefully, if I can be brief, which is not always guaranteed. One is the US has published a list of sanctions on Russian financial institutions and individuals on the 21st of November. It includes banks like Gazprom, but about 50 other banks. It is the most comprehensive sanction list that I have seen the US put out. Now, what does it mean? It means that anybody, whether they're in the US or outside the US, who does business with any of these sanctioned entities is subject to these embargoes under OFAC and is in violation of the law. It doesn't matter whether you are lending to these companies, to these sanctioned entities outside the US and not in the US. The US sanctions are extraterritorial. They apply to everybody. If you have a business with these banks and you have a dollar business at the same time, it doesn't matter that your business with these banks is conducted offshore. You are still captured by the sanction. So basically, if they are enforced, these stop all major arteries by which Moscow gets paid for its oil. So what do we do about that? Well, I think you want to watch very carefully, because Europe is still paying Russia $10 billion a year for using its oil, its energy. Europe is the 3rd biggest user of Russian energy after China and India, who are not even signatories to the sanctions on Russia. But Europe just kind of fiddles and fumbles and makes excuses, and is still paying Putin $10 billion a year. This will become impossible to pay. And that is why the ruble has gone down against the US dollar by about 4% since November 21st, when these sanctions were first published. That's, I think, big noise. Secondly, Iran and the IAEA. Iran has been cheating on refining uranium to the plutonium stage to the stage at which it can be used for missiles. The IAEA has found them out. They have been lying in their reporting to the IAEA too, but more importantly, they have been hiding their attempts to become a nuclear armed state. So there is now a procedure for a full report on this to be prepared by the IAEA by July or June. But the point is that Trump is not going to wait for that. Trump is going to put gigantic tariffs back on Iran. And I suggest that these will also include oil. Now, why will they? Iran, by the way, is exporting about 1.5 million barrels a day of oil, a lot of it to China, most of which is kind of shadow fleet type stuff and smuggling, but nevertheless 1.5 million barrels a day. So Trump will simply embargo that and enforce the embargo. What that means is that the glut in the oil market, which is one of the reasons why oil prices are now back, say, for Brent to $70, $72. The glut in the oil market will be diminished by 1.5 million barrels a day. That will allow the oil price to be maintained at around its current levels, maybe a bit higher. Why does Trump want that? Trump wants that because drill, baby, drill. He wants the oil price to be at a level where people will actually, in the United States, go out and drill and frack and find more oil, because that is a big platform for him. So that is the circle of reasoning, which tells me you want to watch what is happening between the IAEA and Israel. Now, that's the near-term effects. The further out effects will be that, of course, this makes more inevitable the ultimate war between Israel and Iran, because Israel will not allow Iran to become a nuclear state. It can't possibly afford that. So this is a small step on a way towards that war, which I still think is about 12 months away. The first will be tariffs from Trump, for embargoes from Trump on Iranian output. Now, finally, there is the Yiping 3 saga going on in the Straits of the Skaggeraak. This is the Chinese bulk freighter, 20 or 30 years old, a tub, basically, which is suspected of sabotaging the digital cables between Finland and Germany last week. It has been arraigned by Danish, German, and it is reported also Swedish naval vessels, and is stationed in the Skaggeraak while it is investigated. There is a Russian frigate, a Russian missile corvette to the north of it, monitoring things, and there is reported to be another Russian warship in the vicinity. At the same time, the Finns and the Germans are investigating the damage that was done, plus the damage that could have been done that we don't know about to other cables and pipelines. Okay, now this opens up a can of worms, because under the Freedom of Navigation Acts passed when the world was a peaceful place, and we all thought that history had ended, if we were foolish enough to think so, legislation was put in place which says that peaceful passage is accorded by all nations to ships of other nations sailing through their territorial waters, unless they are seen to be an immediate threat. Now, this means that when you call into question the activities of Chinese with Russian captains, by the way, vessels hovering around your cables, and you arraign a boat, which means stopping it without arresting it, then you are in violation of this piece of legislation which says you must allow peaceful passage to all ships of other nations. The idea is to actually change this legislation so that you can stop and search the dark fleet, which is critical, carrying 66% of Russia's oil exports to China and to India. You can stop these tubs, both because they're a major environmental danger and because, of course, they are weapons used by Putin to finance his war, his filthy war of aggression and atrocities in Ukraine. But at a meeting in Brussels last week, it became very clear that the current NATO members and Europe in general are not ready to take the step to enforce a new code of practice against ships passing through your waters, so that you can stop, check their papers and all the other stuff, and the seaworthiness when you come to the dark fleet. It is unlikely that this, unfortunately, is going to happen. It will take a major environmental disaster when one of these tubs sinks and spills a huge amount of oil into the Baltics or on the shores of some other unfortunate state. That will have to happen in order for people to move fast. Now, why is that? It is because at that level of the bureaucracy, the cultural shift in how you consider the axis of China, North Korea, and Iran and Russia, how you consider that axis is not filtered down. It is clear to the people at the top that we are now in a state of gray zone warfare. It is not clear to the people who are responsible for drafting changes to practice and law of merchant ships passing through your coastal waters. And so last week in Brussels, it was overwhelmingly opposed to actually change the laws and make them more effective so that we can protect ourselves and protect Ukrainians against Russian aggression. So it doesn't look like it is going to happen. And the bottom line is people are too afraid of Putin escalating. Now, the real escalation that could occur if we moved against hostile ships in our waters, the real escalation that could occur is that as China is involved every time this happens so far, China would say, well, you are not honoring the freedom of navigation in your waters. I am going to change practice in my waters, which includes the whole of the South China Sea. And so China could stop a few freighters or oil tankers or LNG tankers heading for Taiwan and say, well, I'm just doing the same thing. I'm just checking papers. Now, what are you going to do about it? It would be the perfect excuse for China to spark off the next round of its aggression against Taiwan, which will not be invasion. It will actually be blockade. That is why people are afraid that if they act in the Skaggeraak against this Yipeng 3, that it could have repercussions right across the world in the South China Sea and engender or spark the next crisis about Taiwan. That's about it for today. Lots of data coming out. We've got, in the US, we've got the Fed FOMC meeting minutes. We have got PC inflation, consumer board confidence. In Germany, we've got the IFO and the GfK consumer confidence indexes. And in Japan, we get retail sales, consumer spending and consumer confidence. And we also get industrial production this week, which are all worth watching, but not what I'm talking to you about, which is when geopolitical events, when the macro can affect the markets. I hope that's some use to you. Talk to you again next week. And if I don't talk to you, my US people who are watching, I wish you a very happy Thanksgiving. Have a good week.